There is a film that changed how governments spy on their own people. Not because it revealed classified secrets, but because it imagined them so accurately that the people running those programs recognized themselves on screen. 3 Days of the Condor came out in 1975. It had a modest budget, a political thriller premise, and an ending so unsettling that intelligence professionals across 2 continents couldn't stop thinking about it. The KGB studied it. A former CIA director quietly shaped it. A real oil conspiracy almost became its plot. And 50 years later, everything it warned about has come true. These are 25 secrets hidden inside this film for decades.
1.
The film gave the KGB a blueprint they actually used. Hollywood thrillers almost never influence real intelligence operations. 3 Days of the Condor was the exception. The film's central concept, a CIA literary research unit staffed by analysts reading published books, magazines, and technical journals, hunting for hidden patterns in open-source material, struck Soviet intelligence as genuinely brilliant. Not fictional. Operational. According to accounts from former intelligence officials, KGB leadership studied the concept seriously enough to model an actual analytic division on it. The idea that actionable intelligence could hide in plain sight inside newspapers, academic journals, and publicly available documents resonated deeply with Soviet strategists. The cruel irony is hard to overstate. A paranoid American film about CIA overreach accidentally handed America's primary enemy a methodology for intelligence gathering they then implemented in the real world. Fiction became doctrine. A Hollywood thriller became a classified training document.
2.
A real CIA director secretly coached Robert Redford. Few productions in Hollywood history have received guidance from someone who actually ran America's entire intelligence apparatus. Richard Helms, the former director of Central Intelligence, visited the 3 Days of the Condor set multiple times during production. His presence was never publicized. He didn't appear in press materials. He didn't give interviews about his involvement. But his influence was everywhere. Helms worked directly with Redford on how to inhabit the character of Joe Turner, an analyst, not a field agent. He explained the psychology of intelligence work, the way analysts obsess over connections, the way they carry the weight of knowing things they can never discuss, the small physical details that separate a trained intelligence mind from a civilian. Redford's performance gained something that couldn't have come from research alone. It came from a man who had actually sat inside those rooms and made those decisions. Helms had his own motivation too. He wanted to ensure the CIA wasn't portrayed as purely villainous, and the collaboration gave him subtle influence over how the organization appeared on screen. 3. Warren Beatty was supposed to star in this film. Before Robert Redford ever read the script, 3 Days of the Condor belonged to Warren Beatty. Producer Dino De Laurentiis had attached Beatty to the project with director Peter Yates set to helm the production. The combination looked promising on paper. 2 respected talents with strong instincts. What the arrangement lacked was compatibility. Beatty wanted something rawer, more overtly political, angrier at the institutions it depicted. Yates wanted a tighter, faster thriller. Character within genre, not character instead of genre. Neither position was wrong. They were simply incompatible, and neither man was willing to move. The project stalled for months before De Laurentiis pulled the plug entirely. Redford and Sidney Pollack stepped in, bringing with them an established working relationship that resolved creative disagreements before they became production disasters. The film that Beatty and Yates would have made would have been fundamentally different. Whether it would have been better is the kind of question that keeps film historians up at night.
4.
The title isn't what the novel promised. James Grady's source novel was called 6 Days of the Condor, and those 6 days were the original timeline of the story. Screenwriters Lorenzo Semple Jr. and David Raphael made a calculated decision to compress the timeline to 3, understanding that tighter pacing would amplify paranoia and eliminate every scene that didn't earn its place. But the compression wasn't even the biggest change. Grady's novel centered on illicit drug trafficking as the conspiracy at the story's core. The filmmakers scrapped it entirely. Energy politics replaced it, a conspiracy rooted in oil, Middle Eastern resources, and corporate manipulation of government policy. This wasn't an arbitrary creative decision. The 1973 oil crisis had shaken America to its foundations. Gas lines, rationing, a sudden national confrontation with dependency. Replacing drugs with oil transformed the film's conspiracy from criminal underworld territory into something that touched every American's daily life. The stakes became impossible to ignore.
5.
They manufactured winter from scratch. Filming began in autumn 1974, and the script demanded a cold, hostile New York winter. The production faced a problem nobody had adequately planned for. The trees still had leaves. The weather was mild. Every exterior shot threatened to expose the film season as a fabrication. The solution was labor-intensive and slightly absurd. Crews used cranes and cherry pickers to manually strip leaves from trees across filming locations throughout the city. Leaf blowers cleared streets constantly. Cinematographers developed specific approaches to lighting and framing that neutralized warm autumn tones, replacing them with cold, gray, washed-out imagery that suggested freezing temperatures. Costumes leaned heavily into scarves and heavy coats. Every element of every exterior scene was engineered to support a weather condition that didn't exist. The fabrication was so thorough that no audience member in 1975 questioned whether the winter was real. It wasn't. It was assembled piece by piece from autumn.
6.
New York was never in the original plan. The source novel placed everything in Washington, D.C., the logical home for a story about government conspiracy and intelligence operations. The screenwriters overruled the novel's geography entirely. Lorenzo Semple Jr. and David Raphael relocated the story to New York City based on a single conviction. New York was more frightening. Washington felt controlled. Governmental. A city where surveillance made institutional sense and disappearing into a crowd was bureaucratically organized. New York was chaotic, unpredictable, and genuinely anonymous in ways Washington could never replicate. The crowded subway, the indifferent streets, the millions of faces that saw everything and reported nothing, these created a natural paranoia that the screenplay needed but couldn't manufacture. The relocation also gave Joe Turner a crucial disadvantage. He didn't know these streets. Every corner was unfamiliar. The city itself became an antagonist, trapping him in terrain he couldn't read and couldn't trust.
7.
The most important scene in the film almost didn't work. The opening office massacre, the sequence that establishes everything the film will become, was shot, delivered to the studio, and rejected. Sidney Pollack received direct feedback that the scene was too subdued. It wasn't landing with the force the story required. Audiences needed to understand, viscerally and immediately, that what they were watching was genuinely deadly. Pollack returned to the sequence and rebuilt it from the ground up. He reworked the blocking. He changed the pacing. He leaned into the casual efficiency of the violence, the business-like quality of a professional killing operation, and then into the absolute silence afterward. The revised version transformed a tense moment into something genuinely horrifying. A workplace. Ordinary people. Gone in minutes. The scene's reconstruction was arguably the most consequential creative decision in the film's production, because everything Turner does afterward, every paranoid choice, every person he refuses to trust, only makes sense if the audience felt what happened in that office.
8.
The most frightening villain in the film was the politest man in the room. Max von Sydow made a choice with the assassin Joubert that went against every instinct the genre encouraged. He didn't play menace. He didn't play volatility or barely contain violence. He played courtesy. Joubert was unfailingly polite. He spoke calmly about death the way a competent professional speaks about their work, with mild satisfaction and no particular emotional investment. Von Sydow kept his voice measured, his movements unhurried, his eye contact steady and respectful. The restraint made every scene he inhabited feel like standing next to something deeply wrong while being unable to identify exactly what. The character wasn't driven by ideology or hatred or psychological damage. He was simply very good at a job he had fully accepted. Von Sydow understood something that most actors miss. The people who are genuinely dangerous in the real world rarely look dangerous at all.
9.
The romance in this film was never supposed to exist. Sidney Pollack's original vision for 3 Days of the Condor had no romantic subplot. He wanted Joe Turner's isolation to be total and unbroken, a paranoid thriller in which the protagonist trusted absolutely nobody and received no emotional relief from the relentless pressure of that condition. The studio overruled him. Audiences needed something to attach to, they argued. The relentless tension required emotional counterweight. Pollock was forced to comply, but refused to comply gracefully. He shaped the relationship between Turner and Kathy into something that honored the studio's demand while undermining its intention entirely. Their connection began with coercion. Turner essentially takes her hostage. The sentimentality was stripped out. Their interactions stayed cautious, morally uncomfortable, and rooted in trauma rather than attraction. The romance became another layer of the film's moral complexity rather than a respite from it. The studio got what they asked for. Pollock gave them something they hadn't asked for at all.
10.
Faye Dunaway built an entire character from photographs. The role of Kathy could have been functional and thin, a woman the plot required, defined by her relationship to the protagonist. Dunaway had no interest in that version of the character. She researched how photographers actually see the world, how constant observation through a lens shapes a person's relationship to experience, creating a habit of watching rather than participating. The photographs Kathy had taken weren't props chosen by a set decorator. They were specific images Dunaway selected to reveal a particular interiority: empty urban spaces, distant figures, the studied loneliness of someone who documented life rather than entering it. Each photograph told the audience something about Kathy's interior life without a single line of dialogue. Dunaway built a fully inhabited character through the images surrounding her, transforming what could have been a thin studio-mandated addition into someone whose presence enriched every scene. 11. The screenplay was an act of specialized expertise. Lorenzo Semple Jr. didn't arrive at this project as a generalist. He arrived as someone who had spent years developing a specific understanding of how political paranoia works as a narrative engine, how to structure a story in which every institution hides darker purposes, trust becomes systematically impossible, and every answer generates more dangerous questions. His architecture for 3 days of the Condor was precise. Revelations were metered carefully, ensuring that the audience discovered information at a pace that built dread rather than resolution. David Raphael worked alongside him on the emotional register, ensuring that characters felt human inside the paranoid machinery, that Turner's nightmare resonated personally rather than just intellectually. Together they created something rare, a conspiracy that felt both plausible and overwhelming, personal and global simultaneously. 12. The most chilling moment in the film was improvised. After the alley confrontation, one of the film's most violent sequences, Max von Sydow's Joubert picks up a phone and makes a call. The scene wasn't heavily scripted. Von Sydow simply inhabited the character and began speaking. What emerged was a window into Joubert's entire psychological architecture, the calm of a man who had completely separated professional function from human consequence, who could move from orchestrated killing into routine business communication without detectable transition. Pollock watched the take and immediately recognized that no scripted version could have achieved what improvisation produced. The spontaneous moment revealed more about who Joubert was than any written monologue, because it showed the absence of something, the complete removal of guilt, hesitation, or self-reflection from what should have been a haunted moment. 13. Real CIA safe house intelligence shaped the film sets. Production designers working on 3 days of the Condor received detailed descriptions, sourced through intelligence community connections, of how actual CIA safe houses were structured. Entry point positioning, surveillance equipment placement, how security features were integrated invisibly into domestic spaces. These operational details didn't just add authenticity to set dressing. They governed the logic of how scenes were choreographed. The apartment break-in sequence followed operational reality rather than cinematic convenience because the designers understood how those spaces actually functioned. Audiences sensed something genuine underneath the sequence without being able to identify its source. The realism was structural, not decorative. 14. The two most important people on this film fundamentally disagreed about its main character. Robert Redford and Sidney Pollack had a strong enough working relationship to survive serious creative conflict, and 3 days of the Condor generated serious creative conflict. They argued persistently about how far Joe Turner should go, what ethical lines a desperate man was permitted to cross, whether the film's moral center should hold under pressure or collapse in revealing ways. Redford wanted Turner to maintain integrity under duress. Pollack pushed for darker compromises, believing that real terror forces real people into genuine moral failure. Neither man won the argument completely, which is precisely why Turner emerged as one of cinema's most believably conflicted protagonists. The tension between these two visions produced something more honest than either vision alone would have generated. 15. Cliff Robertson was cast to protect the CIA from itself. The filmmakers understood that a film depicting rogue CIA operations required a character who prevented the story from becoming simple institutional condemnation. Cliff Robertson's casting as Higgins served that function precisely. He brought inherent authority combined with warmth, a combination that made Higgins feel like a genuinely decent man constrained by institutional loyalty rather than a bureaucratic villain. Robertson played Higgins as someone who cared about Turner's survival, who recognized the corruption his organization had produced, and who was nonetheless unable to act outside the system that had formed him. The casting decision reframed the film's argument entirely. 3 Days of the Condor wasn't claiming that intelligence agencies were staffed by monsters. It was claiming something more disturbing, that good people inside corrupt institutions become instruments of that corruption without ever making a single consciously evil choice.
16.
Redford did things on this production that his insurers would have refused to authorize. Robert Redford's commitment to performing his own stunt work throughout 3 Days of the Condor was a source of sustained anxiety for the production team. Rooftop maneuvers, fire escapes, street chases through actual New York City. The star refused doubles for the vast majority of physical sequences, operating on the conviction that audiences unconsciously register the substitution and that Turner's physical exhaustion needed to be real to register as real. The production couldn't stop him. What they could do was worry continuously, and what the camera captured was an actor whose body communicated genuine effort and genuine risk in a way that stunt choreography rarely achieves. 17. The apartment was designed as a psychological weapon. Production designer Stephen Grimes approached Kathy's apartment not as a location, but as an instrument. Every choice served a single purpose: to make the space feel inescapable. Cold blues and grays dominated the color palette, creating emotional distance that matched the coercion underlying every interaction that took place there. Narrow spatial arrangements limited movement and placed characters in uncomfortable proximity. Shadows accumulated in corners where threats might live. The apartment communicated confinement and unease to audiences at a level below conscious recognition. Viewers felt trapped in that space without understanding why. Grimes had weaponized interior designs so completely that the location itself became part of the film's paranoid argument.
18.
The ending almost didn't happen because of a newspaper. The climactic scene, Turner leaking the conspiracy to the New York Times, required the actual Times building and explicit use of the newspaper's name. Without both, the ending lost its meaning. A fictional newspaper would have drained the scene of its power, transforming a statement about real institutions into movie-world theater. Securing cooperation from the Times required delicate negotiations about how journalism and journalists were depicted, whether the film's portrayal aligned with institutional values, and what the newspaper's participation would communicate to audiences about its editorial identity. Permission was eventually granted, but the fragility of that negotiation reveals how close the film came to an ending that would have said something fundamentally different about whether truth has anywhere left to go. 19. Intelligence professionals were disturbed by the ending for reasons that had nothing to do with cinema. When 3 Days of the Condor reached audiences who had worked inside the intelligence community, their reaction diverged sharply from civilian viewers. Civilians found the ending ambiguous but satisfying, a lone individual striking back against institutional power. Former intelligence officers found it plausible in ways that offered no comfort at all. They recognized the operational logic of Turner's situation, the leak to the Times as a desperate last defense, not a triumphant act of justice. They understood that publication didn't guarantee safety, that exposure didn't guarantee accountability, that systems designed to contain information have sophisticated tools for managing the consequences of leaks. The questions the film left unanswered were, for these viewers, not narrative ambiguity. They were accurate representations of how things actually worked.
20.
The film predicted the intelligence architecture of the 21st century. The central premise of 3 Days of the Condor, analysts systematically processing open-source published material to extract intelligence that nobody recognized as intelligence, anticipated open-source intelligence gathering as a formal discipline by decades. The film's depiction of rogue units operating with minimal oversight, of private contractors blurring the line between corporate interest and government action, of information manipulation as a primary strategic tool. Each of these elements describes the actual architecture of intelligence work as it developed in the years and decades following the film's release. The writers weren't prophets. They were simply extending the anxieties of 1975 forward with rigorous logic. But the accuracy of what they imagined, measured against what actually happened, remains one of cinema's most unsettling achievements. They were describing their era's fears. They were, without knowing it, sketching the future. 3 Days of the Condor arrived at the exact moment when Americans were learning that their government's capacity for secrecy was far greater than anyone had admitted. It gave those anxieties a face, a story, and an ending that refused to resolve cleanly into reassurance. The KGB recognized something real in it. CIA directors shaped it from the inside. Real surveillance techniques emerged from educated guesses that turned out to be accurate. And every secret hidden inside this production, from the manufactured winter to the improvised phone call to the legal battle over a newspaper's name, points toward a single uncomfortable truth. The film didn't feel like the truth because filmmakers were careless with fiction. It felt like the truth because the truth was already there, waiting for someone willing to look directly at it. If this script gave you a new angle on one of cinema's most underrated thrillers, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which of these 25 secrets landed hardest for you.